lot, Ruby, and welcome everyone. So glad to see so many of you joining. We will talk today about the impact of Plan S, and I hope we'll have a good discussion on findings so far. And we will start with Coalition S representative Ashley Farley of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who will explain why the study was commissioned and what study objectives are. Then we'll have a presentation from two colleagues from scidecode Consulting, Pablo de Castro and Wolfgang Benedict Schmal, who will present early results. And then we'll have a talk by Emma Wilson of the Royal Society of Chemistry on their roadmap for a transition to full and immediate open access and the impact Plan S played in this transition. Then I hope we'll have a discussion with you, because we also have some questions for you. So keep an eye on your Zoom poll. And of course, we'll have time for questions and discussions. And for that, I would ask you to use Q&A functionality, because it would be easier for us to track your questions. If you have any comments, please use a chat, and please use Q&A for questions. And over to you, Ashley. Thanks a lot.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so for those that don't know me, my name is Ashley Farley. I'm Program Officer, Knowledge Research Services, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we have been a member of Coalition S and have had Plan S as our main open access policy since 2021. So a little bit of background just to set us in the right context. So part of the Plan S implementation guidelines, we committed Coalition S to conclude before the end of 2024 a formal review process that examines the requirements, effects, and the impacts of Plan S. To undertake this review, we ran a public procurement process to identify potential suppliers. And then we chose scidecode Science Consulting, which is led by Pablo de Castro, who you will meet later. They've been contracted to undertake this review. And then the report and all data used to support the findings will be openly shared when it's completed. And we wanted to highlight the review of the impact of Plan S was funded by the European Union. So what are the questions that we look to address here? I wanted to assess the impact of Plan S has had on the scholarly communication ecosystem and facilitating research to be published under open access terms. And we really wanted to be conscientious of considering this from a global perspective. So just not the countries where Coalition S has had maybe a funding footprint. To provide an analysis on the likely progress towards full and immediate open access had Plan S or Coalition S not existed, and using the techniques of counterfactual impact evaluation or similar. To review the effect of transformative agreements, I know this is a hot topic right now, as well as the option of providing immediate open access to subscription content via open repositories, have had on achieving a transition to full and immediate open access. To identify those areas where Coalition S has been effective and ineffective in meeting its Plan S objectives. And then looking to future and to provide recommendations on how to build upon the current achievements of Coalition S. And then here's just a brief timeline to show where we are and where the conclusions and final report will be shared later this year, most likely in summer. And that's all I have. I look forward to the discussion.
So maybe for planning purposes, we'll first go through all the presentations, and then we have a Q&A. So then over to you, Pablo and Wolfgang.
Thank you, Irina. Thank you, Bernie, for all the support in having this organized. Pleasure to be with all of you today. My name is Pablo de Castro. Thanks for the intro. I will try and summarize this ongoing project I am leading on behalf of scidecode. This is the team behind the study to assess the impact of Plan S. As you can see, it's 5 of us in 3 different European countries, the UK, Germany, and France. All of us are affiliated with either universities or research centers in these 3 countries. So it's fair to thank all our institutions for allowing us to do this on the sides of the work we do for them. Describing what we do and what we're doing in the project, you have the structure of the project on the right-hand side of the slide, and we are aiming to apply a mixed methods approach to assessing the impact of Plan S. This means a qualitative assessment on top of the main quantitative assessment, the counterfactual impact evaluation that Ben Small will present in a second. The qualitative assessments that we will do involves 1-hour interviews with a number of relevant stakeholders. You have the list of it on the slide: institutional open access experts, university consortia, researchers, publishers, and research funders, plus in-depth conversations with Coalition S member funders, that is following the work package structure design on the right-hand side of the slide. 2 caveats to bear in mind in this regard. First, we will assess the impact of Plan S in the period from the time it was released in 2018, September, until the end of 2023, based on the policy strategies available during those 5 years. So whatever has come afterwards, that will not be in scope for our analysis of the impact of Plan S. It would be far too recent. This said, it will still, or it may still be a bit early to assess the impact of some of the policy instruments that are part of Plan S in the period I have mentioned. So I'm thinking rights retention probably is fairly recent. It will be difficult to measure, particularly quantitatively, the impact of such policies. Few early findings and recommendations in a nutshell. I don't have much time to go through all this, but depending on stakeholder, we have seen different perceptions on what the main impacts of Plan S has actually been. So you have the feelings of institutions. Most of the institutions that we've talked to have commended Plan S for putting the topic of open access firmly on the radar, whereas consortia are happy that Plan S has managed to bring publishers to the negotiating table. It all, of course, has multiple effects. And publishers on their side state that Plan S has meant a much welcome opportunity to harmonize open access policies particularly across Coalition S member funders, but also beyond. There is also an intended consequence of Plan S that often gets mentioned by interviewees, which is the market concentration. Haven't put it on the slide, but I thought it was worth mentioning. It's likely from the interviews, the qualitative analysis we are conducting, that there will be a fragmentation in business models for read and publish agreement implementation across countries going forward. So we know Coalition S has stated that its members will stop supporting transformative agreements from an economic perspective at the end of this year. However, it's not always Coalition S members who are funding these agreements. It's often universities themselves in certain countries, particularly with no Coalition S representation in them. Then even if Coalition S member funders stopped funding TAs, transformative agreements, it would not necessarily mean they will stop, they will go away. So one recommendation arising from this for institution is to try and develop coordinated frameworks for assessing the value of transformative agreements. We don't have that much at the moment. So it would be really useful for institutions to come up with proper criteria to assess the value of these policy instruments. Another finding from the qualitative analysis of Plan S is that the way ahead will inevitably involve a mix of coexisting business models for open access implementations. So APCs will stay there. Transformative agreements are likely to do so as well. Diamonds OA is growing very strongly these days. Subscribe to open. Some large publishers have already stated their intention to test the subscribe to open model. Rights retention is growing very strongly as well, and preprints are also on the radar as a business model going forward. So a number of recommendations arising from this for institutions to explore ways to diversify funding workflows. So one finding from one of the above items is that we, see all eggs being put in the same basket in terms of funding. So the recommendation is to try and diversify through consortia, probably. For funders, one strong recommendation is to try and coordinate implementation of rights retention, often for funded works, but increasingly beyond that, in a slightly, in a way that would benefit from some harmonization and international discussion. And finally, for publishers, the recommendation would be to try and keep an observatory, some sort of description of how the business models are evolving around open access implementation. The link there, the slides, of course, will be shared, is to the Subscribe to Open community of practice, where there's a full list of publishers already running this business model. And then finally, the increased open access implementation workflows risks losing researchers. Researchers have often lost track quite a while ago of what the various routes for implementing open access currently are. So one strong recommendation for all stakeholders involved in this is to try and get researchers involved in the process. I've linked there what I see as one of the most inspiring initiatives to do this. This was a workshop that the Royal Society of Chemistry organized in July last year. I've left the URL there for you in case you want to take a look. It's a really good initiative. There are others as well, of course. And then I wanted to finish with this striking similarity we have come across in the process of conducting this project. This is a European Parliament commissioned report. This is the Panel for the Future of Science and Technology on improving access to medicines and promoting pharmaceutical innovation. There's a number of areas where the same conflict that we see right now in the scholarly communication landscape comes up, and this is one of them. So as you can see there, I'm not going to read it for you because I don't have time either, but the issues that the collaboration between research performing organizations in the area of medicines, of drug development, and the pharma company are arising are very similar to the ones we're seeing between the kind of public sector scholarly communications infrastructure and the commercial publishing sector. So yeah, this report looked at the issues that are identified whereby development in drugs for low profit diseases do not happen, regardless of the fact that these are kind of sorely needed. And this is what the report looked into. You have the QR code on the slide. I'm not sure if you will be able to scan it directly from the slide, but again, the slides will be shared. As you can see, there is a lot of similarity. The policy options suggested in the report suggest, include a suggestion to strengthen the EU coordination in intellectual property rights, which is very much one work line for the whole scholarly communication community, to try and see whether copyright can be reformed or amended so that rights retention can happen. in different countries. And then there's also a suggestion to create a public infrastructure active throughout the whole drug research and development process, which is very what is currently happening in the scholarly communication landscape. So there's a number of recommendations in this report that we are keeping well in mind when looking at our own recommendations for the future of open access implementation. Thank you, and happy to take your questions or discussion later. Thanks.
Well, Pablo, and thank you, colleagues, for adding your questions. There is already one for Ashley, which we'll address shortly. Over to you, Wolfgang.
Thank you very much, and welcome you all to this webinar. I'm feel quite honored to be able to present here. Yeah, and as part of scidecode for this project, I'm responsible for the quantitative counterfactual impact evaluation. And I'm going to share some preliminary results with you, which does not mean that this will be final. These are preliminary, as said, and there will be more results in the final report, and also the ones presented today might change a little bit. So please wait until you see a final report. That said, let's directly jump into the topic with a brief introduction what I'm gonna do here. So this is a bit of methodology. It's called the difference in difference method. And I've brought you a little plot here to illustrate basically what we do. So what we want to do, we want to examine the causal effect of a policy. In our case, Plan S. And a simple pre-post comparison is not sufficient in our case, because we don't know what happens if general trends overshadow the policy effect. For example, you don't know when open access changes from 2010 to 2020, you don't know what has driven these results. There are many reasons, and maybe there's just a general upward trend. And this is not causal, right? It's just an observation, it's descriptive statistics, which does not mean that this would be bad, but we try, at least we attempt, and I will also present you some caveats, some causal effects. And if you look on the left side, we try to separate, we try to look at two groups, a treatment group, these are funders that have implemented Plan S, and a control group, which means funders not having implemented Plan S. And we also have a second control group we call a comparison group. But more importantly, as we use the control group, this would be the lower bar here to net out general time trends, right? So we want to look at the causal effect. And in our example here, this would be the difference between P2 and Q. So we look at the change between the treatment group, P2 minus P1, and subtract from it the change in the control group. Basically, so it's a bit more involved in econometric statistic terms, but this is basically what we do. We try to identify this effect by netting out the control group and isolating this treatment effect. This is similar maybe also to what you know from clinical trials, right? So in clinical trials, you have the drug, the group that gets the new drug, and the other group, the control group, that gets the placebo. And if some people in the control group get, for example, headache, you don't assign this to the new drug because it's in the placebo group, right? And we try to simulate this with a difference in different method in the field. But of course, this is less clean than a randomized controlled trial, because we are in the real world and we don't have this randomization opportunity. And we have actually many confounders in our setting in the case of Plan S. That said, let's proceed. Sorry, I can go also full screen. I'm sorry, apologies for this. So what are our ingredients here? Our strategy is to look at publications supported by specific funding agencies. Specific funding agencies to look at the likelihood of a supported paper, a publication that has received funding by one of these funders to be published with a certain access type, either looking at closed access requiring a subscription, or green, gold, or hybrid open access. And as said, we have 2 or 3 groups. The treatment group are funders that align with Plan S. That's FWF from Austria, NCN from Poland, the HHMI from the United States, NWO from the Netherlands, and the UKRA from the United Kingdom. As a control group, We have these funders from Chile. We have a funder MBIE from New Zealand, and we have the Natural Science Foundation of China, which is of course quite a big funder in this regard and makes up for the vast majority of publications in this group. And as a comparison group, which is the second control group we look at separately, we use FWO from Flanders in Belgium, DFG in Germany, and NCI also from the United States. Why do we do this? We separate this because we expect that in the comparison group, these funders are really interested in open access, regardless of Plan S, while the control group, we suspect this is a bit less the case. So it's less impacted by Plan S or by open access debates. And to separate these two groups from each other, the OA leaning group, comparison group, and the not so much, which doesn't mean there's no OA, but not so much, a group not so much being involved into the OA debates. The timing is as follows. So we have pre-post, as I've shown you in this plot. So the cutoff date is January 1, 2021. So we have two timeframes from 2015 to 2020 and from 2021 to 2023, which is shorter than the previous period, but this is not a problem per se in statistical terms. So this we can net this out. The data source is OpenAlex, the OpenAlex database, amended by additional work from OA Works, and also can see the blog post by Pablo on the choice of the data provider. And there is this site on the scidecode website, there is this post by Pablo where he explains why we have chosen this data provider and what are the advantages, but also maybe the disadvantages. And as also said by Ashley and Pablo, all data and code files will be made publicly available under Creative Commons license. So let me now, and now it's a bit dry content, but let me now still go to some econometric statistic stuff we have to talk about, because the so-called parallel trends assumption. So let me go back. We have these two lines here, right? And we assume that's the dashed line that without the treatment, without Plan S, the development in the treatment group for the treated funders would have been the same as for the control group, right? So this is an assumption you always need in this causal inference method in the hypothetical absence of the treatment, which we don't know, we cannot observe, so this is assumption. What our problem is, and this is a big caveat, we cannot really circumvent, is that the treatment group funders I've shown you on the previous slide already had high open access shares among supported publications before the introduction of Plan S and the implementation of it. So it's more difficult to substantially expand than for those funders. Sorry that this bullet point ends here, a bit surprisingly, but it's more difficult to substantially expand, for example, from 80 to 90% compared to 10 to 20%, right? So this makes this parallel trend a bit iffy, broadly spoken. And we also have this short post period. And the issue that it's not a statistical issue that this is shorter than the previous period, but we have an issue that this treatment effect, the effect of Plan S potentially is yet to unfold, so that we don't have enough time yet to observe the effects. So this is a major caveat here, and this is why we also chose a mixed methods approach, including an extensive qualitative interview-based analysis, is that it's a bit difficult to obtain clear causal evidence. That said, that's now a really heavy slide, and I know this. Let us look at open access flavors by funder. So these are the 5 treatment funders I've presented you, the 5 funders that have implemented Plan S, and looking at the 5 access types here. So we have 4 open access types: broad, which is rather a minor category, gold, green, hybrid, and then in contrast, closed access. And then the 6th tile here is all the 5 funders together, just aggregated. If you sum up these numbers, you get the numbers here. And what can we observe? If we look at most of the funders, we see that closed access is really a small fraction, right? Here it's like it started with 13%, goes down to 8.5. Here's 8, went up a little bit. Here it's 10 for NWO, 7 later on. QKRI, it's only 7%. Later on, it's 10%. But of course, this is fluctuation, right? So the only funder is the Polish funder, that stands out, where we had 42.3% closed access before 2021 in the funded publications, and only 1/4, 25% later on after the implementation of Plan S. But in general, you can also observe this here in this final tile. You can see that most publications have been made open access before, and most publications have been made open access afterwards. So that's, as said, this is this crucial issue we deal with and we face. Nevertheless, and this is also my last slide, because I'm running into the last minute of my presentations. Here we look at changes within open access flavors. And I know this is a heavy plot, so let me walk you through this panel here. What do we see? So we don't look at closed access. We throw away all closed access publications for this exercise, not in general, but for this panel. And we compare the change in open access flavors. We have the control group, as said, Chile, New Zealand, and China, and the comparison group, which is a bit more leaning towards open access. As we say, DFG, FWO, and NCI. And we have 3 types of open access. What do we see? We see the treatment of Plan S relative to the 2 comparison groups. So let's look at the first 2 estimates here. 0 is the null effect, and every confidence interval crossing the 0 line means an insignificant effect. The larger lines are the 99% confidence intervals. The smaller lines are the 95% confidence intervals. And we see that gold open access relative to other types of open access did not change in response to Plan S. Neither for the control group nor for the comparison group. This does not mean there is no increase. It does only mean that relative to the control group or relative to the comparison group, there's no bigger change, right? So it's just this, if you look at this here, it's just this difference between P2 and Q. Then we go to hybrid open access. Here we see that relative to the control group, China, Chile, and New Zealand, hybrid open access expanded much more at the cost of other open access types for Plan S. While looking at the comparison group, which is quite dominated by the German DFG, the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, German Research Foundation, we see that relative to this comparison group, hybrid open access expanded more slowly, which does not mean, again, it's a negative coefficient. It does not mean it shrinked. It means it grew slowly. And lastly, we look at green open access, and we see that green open access decreased relative to the control group, and there is an insignificant effect for the comparison group. So to sum up, we see that hybrid open access relative to the comparison group, hybrid open access grew at the expense of other open access flavors, and most likely it grew at the expense of green open access for this control group. And relative to the comparison group, we do not see a major expansion or major change between open access shares. What we also do in the report is we look at changes relative to closed access. As I said, this is not part of this presentation, but it will be part of the final report. But this is the first piece of evidence I want to show you. It's the changes within open access types. Which flavor grew at the cost of others? And this is what we see so far. That's it from my side. Again, please keep in mind these are early findings. We have some problems with this how comparable these groups are. So there are some caveats. Be careful with a fully causal interpretation due to the facts and due to the issues I have presented to you. But this is what we see so far, and then I'm looking forward to writing and finalizing the final report, and later on I'm looking forward, of course, first of all, to your questions and comments. That's it from my side. Yeah, that's my profile. If you want to Google me, check me out. But that's it from me, and now I'm handing over again to Irina, I think.
Thank you so much, and I'm inviting Emma to share her case study.
Great, thank you so much. So a huge thanks to Irina and also to Pablo for inviting me to be part of this very timely discussion. And I'm really thrilled to be here joining you all today. And a shout out obviously to OASPA for providing these webinar series. So my name's Emma Wilson, and I'm going to share with you a little bit about our roadmap towards open access. Around 18 months ago, we committed to transition to become a full open access publisher by 2028. So what influenced our decision making, and I think Plan S was a contributor to that. And I'll share with you our top level roadmap and some of our recent work as well. So if I can have the next slide, please. So before I do that, I'd like to set our open access work in the broader context of what the RSC does. So we're a learned society, and we have a huge breadth of activity. So from our educational work, our policy work, our, convening scientific conferences, and of course our publishing program. But everything that we do is focused on delivering our purpose, which is to help the chemical sciences community make the world a better place. We have a vision where our discipline has fulfilled its potential as a force for good, and part of our mission is about providing opportunities and tools for our community to create and exchange knowledge. And of course, this is where our publishing program comes in. So on the next slide, I can talk a little bit about that. So we're a mission-driven, community-based, not-for-profit publisher. We publish chemistry databases, we publish books, we partner with other chemical societies to bring the preprint server Chem Archive to our community, and we publish journals. So we have a portfolio of both hybrid publications and also gold open access journals. And our flagship journal, Chemical Science, is published under the Diamond model. And we're publishing at scale. So we publish around 37,000 articles a year. And so why have we decided, what was our decision making? Why have we decided to transition to become an open access publisher? And there are a number of things that play into that, of course. So one is we've been innovative in the open access space, along with many other society publishers for some time, so well over a decade. So in some cases, it's a natural evolution of the work that we're doing. Also, we believe open access supports our purpose and our mission in terms of the work that we publish, having maximum impact for other scientists to build on, and also to have societal impact and maximize that. And that's extremely important for society publishers, including the RSC. And the other is the sort of timing and that broader open access policy environment that Pablo has been talking about previously. And Plan S is part of that, of course. So we're looking at, the timing of global policy environments around open access, and we felt the timing was right. So we were active before 2018 in open access, and we've been active afterwards. But on the next slide, I say, obviously, in 2018, Plan S was published. It was controversial, somewhat controversial at the time, and it remains so, but it has created a huge amount of discussion. It comes back to the findings that we've just heard of in terms of from the kind of broader stakeholder groups, author behavior, customer, sort of readiness, and also that broader policy environment. So it really did bring people to the table. It was a huge amount of discussion, and I would argue quite a bit of collaboration as a result as well. I can only speak obviously from the RSC's perspective, but it certainly did sort of focus minds as well here internally. So again, if I can have the next slide, it's also how that works and how that plays out in the broader open access environment and policy environment as well. So there have been a number of shifts there. Plan S and various initiatives in Europe, of course the US as well, and Japan requiring immediate access too. Librarians, I think, have really championed as well and experimented a huge amount in the open access space. We've talked a lot about transformative agreements, and they are part of our open access journey. There's a lot of discussion around that, of course. So for us at the RSC, it was really no longer a question of if it's open access, but when, and also very importantly, how. And I'll touch on that a bit in the next slides. So our vision for open access is one where the author-facing fees are reduced and the costs associated with publishing services are spread across the scholarly communications landscape. For us, it's also important that open access, it means quality and integrity as well. And any open access models will need to really underpin the peer review and quality control and integrity checks and mechanisms that we have in place. It's extremely important to us as a society publisher, and those cannot be compromised at all. So on the next slide, as I said, what have we been doing in this regard? Really, it's been partnering at a global level with stakeholders across the globe to better understand where they're at and their priorities and requirements and goals for open access. You know, if there are ways that we can move away from models that rely on author paying article processing charges, and more broadly, institutional models that rely on APC or article-based fee structures. So if I can have the next slide, please. I just want to really, again, this is really just for illustrative purposes, but how important that kind of global view is, both in terms of the policy environment, but also in terms of customers, you know, experimenting and wanting open access models, and also authors in terms of supporting open access as well. I've put a few significant, you know, author and customer communities here on this slide, but all of our author and customer communities are important. Just wanted, as I said, to make the point here. So around 25 years ago, we were, those communities were really the prevailing model was a subscription one. If we fast forward to around now, on the next slide, you know, there's been a significant shift in terms of that open access environment, with Europe, I think, leading the way there. It really is the norm in many disciplines to publish through open access models in Europe now. And I think Plan S has been part of that. In the US and Japan, and maybe towards that kind of tipping point, remains to be seen. And then in China and India, those customer and author communities are still the prevailing model for us is still at that subscription or closed access as well. And fast forward into the future, I mean, who knows what will happen here? But as I said, we believe that there is that shift towards open access, and that this will continue, and there will be a tipping point that will enable us to make that sustainable transition from a mixed model publisher to an open access one. So on the next slide, I can talk a little bit and share our open access roadmap. We're still in an exploratory phase here, moving through to an implementation and a transition phase. We're doing a lot of work sort of concurrently and in parallel. A lot of scoping and community engagement, talking to our customers and our author groups. This is very regional specific. I don't believe that there will be one model that will serve all regions. and also model development itself, which was predated by a significant amount of data gathering and data cleansing, which was actually quite, we underestimated that aspect actually of the work. And now we're working with customers to co-develop our models. We still have and are still negotiating transformative agreements, so-called read or publish and publish and read. And we do see that as an important part of our open access journey, but we don't see that model as being fit for purpose to enable us to make a full transition. We believe that there needs to be another generation of models which more evenly spread some of those costs and are not linked directly to APC pricing. And we're looking at piloting new agreements and then the conversion phase. Very quickly on the next slide, again, very much for illustrative purposes. Please don't take too much from the size of the boxes. But what we have here currently, we have 3 models that support our publications. One is the APC models on our gold journals, one is institutional subscription models, and one is institutional transformative, either read or publish and read. And we're looking, as I said, to work with customers to develop new open access models that are more fit to a completely open access future, and those becoming the predominant models that support our publications and our author and customer, our author community as well. So finally, on this slide, I really wanted to share with you our recent collaborative development of a new open access model. So this was done after a year of collaboration with the Leibniz Information Center for Science and Technology and the University Library in Germany. And we've announced the pilot of a 4-year agreement that supports 77 institutes in Germany. And so they can publish unlimited open access across all of our publications. Germany was a great place to start. Europe is quite far advanced in terms of open access, and we have great ties with the TIB, who is also a partner in ChemArchive as well. But also because the diversity of our customer base in Germany, which is quite representative of other key regions as well. So we have a customer base that's both high, has high publication outputs, high research intensive institutions, and also ones that are have a lower publication output, the so-called kind of read only institutes. Before the agreement, we had a read and publish, around 30 institutes were on a read and publish deal with us. And we also then had individual subscribers on subscription packages with us as well. And many of those smaller institutes were unable to come into the read and publish because of the pricing structure was prohibitive for them. So the new agreement is a different model, and there are 3 components to it. So there's a member component, which is a flat rate, which is applies across all publishing and all participating institutes, and it holistically covers publishing services. There's a member plus component, which is variable, and this applies only to institutes that publish. And then lastly, there's a discount structure that leverages community action, and the more institutes that participate within the consortia, there is a better rate for all of the participating institutes. And so the other important thing, as I said, is it's not an APC. The publishing component is not an APC-based model. And the publishing component is distributed across the publishing institutes and not tied to a per article fee. And the fees for all participating institutes are more fairly shared across, across all of the members of the consortia. And that was a huge contributing factor to the success of the negotiations. And finally, I will leave you on the final slide, which is just what we have learned in this process. So for us, having a clear commitment to an open access future enabled really positive customer collaborations. We had dedicated resources sort of internally working, doing this work, and very close relationships between our sales and editorial teams. The importance of setting our open access transition as an organisational wide priority, I wouldn't underestimate. And of course, although we went into this with our eyes open, there really are challenges around that global transition. So I think there will need to be multiple models that suit different regions. So with that, I will leave you and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Emma. And thanks a lot, everyone, for your questions, really excellent ones. And we'll start addressing them in a minute. Now I would like to ask Lachlan from the Events Hub to start a Zoom poll, because we have something that we want to ask you about. You should see on your screen our first question. Which of the following Plan S routes to achieve an immediate open access do you find more promising? And it's a single choice option. So maybe if you could choose between read and publish OCA transformative agreements, diamond open access, rights retention strategy, other models such as subscribe to open or preprints. I hope you're seeing this question, and I hope you are answering it already. How are we doing with the results? Are we ready to show them, or do we need another minute? Interesting. So we have Diamond Open Access as the first choice, then transformative agreements, other models such as subscribe to open, rights retention strategy, and preprints. Thanks a lot. Let's dig into questions, and we'll probably take them in the order they appeared. So the first one is to Ashley. The recent update of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Open Access strategy seems like drawing consequences from the study even before it was finished. Why did the foundation make that step now?
Thanks. Yeah, great question. Happy to answer that. I think from the Gates Foundation context, we were already doing our own review of a decade of open access. We feel it's really important to respond to the community concerns around the APC model and rising APC prices, and facing our own budget constraints and being able to fulfill that commitment. And I think also as a private foundation, we can we're lucky to be able to pivot or move a bit more quickly than maybe other funders or organizations can.
Thanks a lot. The next question is, I guess, could be answered by different panelists. I'll read it, and you can decide who would like to take it. There is a risk that Coalition S withdrawing support for transformative agreements from 2025 onwards will reduce open access article output. Likewise, the ending of APC payments on transformative journals will also reduce open access publications. How will Coalition S work to prevent this very undesirable reversal of recent upward trends happening? I don't know if anyone could comment on that.
I can comment really quickly because I meant to add more to the previous question on this. So I think that was another data point for us, is the end of the transformative journals, which we supported. So that is something that we need to communicate and navigate with our grantees. It made more sense to move away from the APC model more broadly. And so that's kind of a natural transition as as well for us. But as far as the, I think, broader question, I think there's a lot of room for discussion to really discuss what that open access article output is and looks like, and what are we prioritizing as that output.
Thanks a lot.
If I may jump in, Irina,
Yes,
just
please.
to thank you. So one aspect I didn't mention as one of the impact of Plan S we're seeing in the qualitative analysis is transparency. So it's something that is happening. Plan S has promoted an increased level of transparency with regard to where the expenditure in APCs or in transformative agreement is going and how much publishing actually costs. The report I mentioned with the pharma industry is also relevant here because it's often the case that the pharma industry claims research and development costs as a basis for the pricing of their drugs. That's public sector research organizations that carry out the research claim are not correct. Those figures are not correct, they say. So, and this is resulting in the development of this kind of public sector infrastructure for drug development, which is kind of happening at the same time in the scholarly landscape, in the scholarly publishing landscape, with all this diamond open access momentum we are seeing right now with the preprints, the bets on preprints, and so on. So I think transparency will be a key factor going forward to see how the landscape evolves. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. The next question is for Wolfgang. I remember you participated in an earlier OASPA webinar on how big deals and hence also funder mandates can change also behavior, project deal. Is there any more data or updates how big deals mandates might be changing also submission behavior to publishers and potentially disadvantaging the smaller society publishers who may not have the resources to have institutional agreements that align with Plan S terms and conditions? JISC deals, for example?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, I mean, there is some literature going on. I think it would be too far-fetched to know, I don't know, make a verbal literature review. I have provided some follow-up study. I mean, that's now some self-advertising, I'm aware of that, but it's recently published in Scientometrics, in the journal Scientometrics, where I did some follow-up on the German deal negotiations. So the big deal called Deal between Springer Nature, Wiley, and the German Alliance of Research Institutions. And it corresponds to our earlier study that we indeed discussed 3 years ago in an OASPA webinar, only for chemistry back then. And it basically shows that it's not so easy to disentangle the effects, and many things play a role there. So it doesn't seem to be the case that it solely benefits, is beneficial solely for the big publishers, even though there is some evidence that publishers might benefit, especially if they are already leading in their field, right? So some kind of Matthew effect, that those who are already successful before the big deal agreement become even more successful in these particular fields. But it's field specific, actually, or it seems to be field specific. And there's also some evidence is also, I mean, that's an archive preprint I've recently published, but there is some theoretical argument that big deals might make it harder for gold open access publishers to secure funding from funding agencies and universities, simply because of the combination of reading and publishing access in one contract, right? So even if less people publish with a publisher with a transformative agreement, it might be the case that they still soak up a lot of money because of their extensive portfolio of past important publications with closed access. So that universities still need to use a lot of money to buy their researchers access to the closed publication portfolio of big publishers, which might be in favor of separating reading and publishing contracts and also of green open access or diamond open access or subscribe to open, which is tentative interpretation of mine. So that's I mean, I think that's it, what I can answer right now, to not overstretch the answer. But please feel free to send me an email or reach out anytime.
Thank you so much. And I guess you already covered some parts of the next question, but I would still read it. And if someone would like to add anything, needs tend to talk about analysis of transformative agreement effectiveness as if it was an entirely elastic market and a purely economic budget market. Please discuss how the effects of limited publishing options, political pressures from funding agencies, big publisher domination of the metrics market are skewing effects of transformative agreements in publication choices of researchers.
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I, for myself, always try to cover this, at least in the descriptive part of the paper. It's a really complicated market, right? There's so many things playing a role: university budgets, researcher budgets, funding agencies, university councils, co-authors, career level, where your university or research institution is placed, right? Global North, Global South. Are you part of institutions with many transformative agreements or few? So that's really an issue, and it's complicated, right? There's no easy answer to it, as you already say. It's quite fuzzy, and if you do quantitative analysis of any kind, you always have to narrow your analysis, right? And you have to look at some selected points, and you try to isolate some effects, right? And if you try to isolate effects, you always have to abstract from other effects, right? You cannot look at everything. You cannot go broad and deep at the same time. That's. I mean, maybe some super bright minds can, but that's really a challenge, and you have to focus on things. And it's important to keep that in mind. It's important to include this in explanations, potential explanations, or causal mechanisms that might cause some quantitative findings. But you always have to narrow your analysis down a little bit if you do quantitative work. That's unfortunately the case, at least in my understanding. Yeah, I'm sorry that I cannot provide a better answer here.
Thanks a lot. Maybe it's a good timing to show our next question to everyone, our second poll. If Lachlan could help with that. What's your view on read and publish deals? And again, it's a single choice question. Very negative. This is not the way. Somewhat negative. It was a good experiment, but it hasn't succeeded. Neither positive nor negative. Broadly positive as a transitional strategy. Positive, but hardly sustainable. Very positive. This is the way forward. It would be good to hear what you think about that. And also, if you want to add some comments in the chat, please do so if you select a specific option. How are we doing with the results? How is the voting goes? Thank you. So we seem to have majority think, not majority, 30% thinking broadly positive as a transitional strategy. Then 25% think somewhat negative. It was a good experiment, but it didn't really succeed. Then positive but hardly sustainable, 18%. 12% neither positive nor negative, and also 12% very negative. This is not the way. And then 6% very positive. This is a way forward. Thanks a lot for answering that. We have 2 questions related to the Global South. So I'll probably read both of them. The first one is a study looking at the impact of researchers in the Global South? Is it looking at the impact of open access on research integrity and the rise of paper mills and non-peer-reviewed articles? is it looking at the impact on publishers who are not commercial, society, and not-for-profit sector? And then I think a related question, well, it's not really about study, but it's about transformative agreements. Please talk about how the studies and future initiatives can address the potentially chilling effect of transformative agreements on diversity, global south, regional research, and specialist disciplines. Who would like to take a stab at answering any of them?
I'm happy to take that one. For starters, at least, would welcome any other panelist who wants to jump in. So we have indeed explored attitudes towards Plan S in the Global South as part of the qualitative analysis. So we have interviewed institutional scholarly communication experts, consortia, and research funders in countries like Chile, Peru, Colombia, and South Africa. These are the ones that come to mind right now. The impact of Plan S in the Global South, this is what our study is about. So there's a very wide source of, range of questions we could try to address, but we're essentially trying to assess how Plan S has impacted the scholarly comms landscape worldwide. The impact has been much lower as a rule, but we are seeing a kind of several waves of Plan S influence also in the adoption of transformative agreements, of read and publish agreements in Global South countries and institutions. The interviewees often say it makes economic sense for them, and it makes sense in terms of improving the landscape on data analysis. So libraries in the Global South are typically much weaker than in the North. Their kind of political clout, if I may put it that way, is lower. They are not able to track the APC payments that are happening directly from researchers. There is an improvement in terms of the accountability and the traceability of the data, of the payments, of the workflows, how they are implemented. So I would say it's not black and white in terms of the Global South, at least from the interviews we have conducted, but happy to hear anybody else's opinions on that. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe you could add in the chat your opinion if you disagree with what Pablo mentioned. There is a question to Wolfgang about Diamond. Regarding the slide descriptive statistics, open access flavors by funder, would it be possible to get some numbers regarding the open access flavor Diamond too? Any comments about that?
Yeah, I can answer this quite briefly, because it would be great to have these data, and I think it would be great to explore the avenue of Diamond open access further, but unfortunately we didn't get information on Diamond open access by OpenAlex or else OA works. So there's no separate category for Diamond open access, so we cannot analyze this, unfortunately. It would be great to have this, but it's not possible in the present data set. Thank you.
Thanks. The next question is, publishers, particularly London professional societies, need the revenue from transformative agreements, APCs, to be able to carry out the publishing activities. Is there not a risk to these publications being able to continue if Coalition S withdraws support for transformative agreements and there is a growth in self-archiving rights retention? If publishers cannot afford to continue to publish certain journals, doesn't that reduce the choice of publishing options for researchers? Who would like to answer this question? Yeah, maybe Emma, please.
I can provide, I mean, a certain perspective. And yes, I think, you know, potentially there are some risks there, but I think it actually came back a little bit to what Pablo said in terms of their findings as well. In terms of how transformative agreements are funded, it's often by the institute and not necessarily directly by the funder. And also there are different funder policies within the Coalition S group in terms of how they view and support transformative agreements post 2025. Again, I can only speak from the RSC's perspective, but we actually think that the risks around that are relatively low in terms of our agreements. But I would say, you know, we are relying on you know, a general global support and shift towards open access to enable a sustainable transition. And obviously, you know, Ashley is here, but the recent sort of Gates Foundation, you know, sort of statements are. You know, that's something again that we'll need to be sort of factoring in again from our perspective. And we are in, you know, we're a single subject publisher, which also gives us makes us maybe a little bit more nimble. It's a very complex area, but we have, you know, more exposure in some areas than in others in terms of specific funders as well.
Thanks a lot, Emma. And since you are speaking, maybe I'll ask some questions addressed to you. So the first one, in the context of Emma's call for libraries to reinvest subscriptions funds into open access, how can publishers support us in doing that when the cost of the subscription content continues to increase as well? E.g., for more library funds to go into open access, less has to go into subscriptions. Have you ever thought about that? And do you have any advice?
Yeah, yes. I mean that is a you know, a very good question, and of course a very sort of live issue as well. You know, part of the study that GISC did actually looking at TA agreements again talked around some of this as well. I mean, some of the things that I'm talking about is actually with our own customer base in terms of moving over from subscription spend to open access spend with us, or a model with us. But there are, as you said, you know, challenges around, you know, the total publishing budgets. The new model that we have, as I said, has a community action aspect. So some of those, you know, fee structures are shared across a broader group as well.
Thank you. And there is also a question on new open access models. Might you give us some information on what new open access models RSC could imagine? Maybe you
really, I mean,
that a little bit.
I've spoken about the one that we've got, and I'll be happy to you know, speak a bit more in detail to anyone that wants to reach out. I'll put that I'll put my email address in the chat. But really, in terms of those, it's not really what we can imagine, it's what we can imagine with our customers, and those are very much still in development. We are very much at a, you know, at the start of some of this around the implementation, you know, around the code development. So it depends on the appetite and the readiness of our customers in those regions. We don't have a blueprint in our back pocket that we're rolling out. It really is, you know, we really are developing these sort of, you know, live and as we're going.
Thanks a lot. Maybe the last question for you. If funders like Gates stop paying for gold APCs and others perhaps follow suit, how will the flip work for the RSC?
I mean, it's important, obviously, as I said, for us that there is an overall environment that supports an open access, open access publishing, whether that's we're a mixed model publisher, so whether that's a shift for us. I think overall, it is important that there is an environment that is supportive of open access, and that is a changing landscape. So how this is going to work, and if funders, were not supporting open access through, policy and also supplying funds, that things would potentially be somewhat different. In terms of immediate exposure for us, it's relatively low, but an open access transition depends on a policy, a customer, and an author environment that enables and supports it.
Thanks a lot. Maybe also a question for Ashley. Aren't Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation concerned about issues such as research integrity if they focus so strongly on preprints?
Yeah, so that's that could be a whole separate webinar. I think, of course, research integrity is important. I think it's become a very overused term at this point that is starting to lose some meaning. I think there's lots of examples in post-publication peer review where we see lots of issues with already published works. I don't think the peer review process is infallible, and I think that we have a bit of a peer review crisis right now that isn't being addressed in a timely fashion. And I think for our policy change, it's important to note that this is for our funded research. So we've already done extensive vetting in order to give the grants in the first place. So we have a higher trust in the outputs. And I think what's most important is getting to a stage where we ensure the other components of the article, such as the data, is available so we can actually review those analyses and hope to improve the research integrity. We made the announcement this week that we are working on top of our Gates Open Research platform to have additional checks on our preprints if our grantees are posting them there. So I think using tools to try and improve that as well, and as we test out other ways. But I think we really have to focus on making sure that the data is available with preprints. They're broadly available to more of a global community to have eyes and comment on them. I know preprint commenting is not a popular practice at this point, but it is growing, and we hope to be able to support initiatives that improve that.
Thank you so much. And apologies, we didn't manage to answer all your questions, but like we promised in the beginning, we'll write the answers, and responses will be shared via email and also on the webinar page. So maybe final comments from any of the panelists, anything else you would like to add that you didn't have a chance to say yet?
I think these were great questions, and thanks for being part of the discussion.
Yes, very much so. I really enjoyed being part of the discussion. I think the questions are brilliant, by the way, and there's loads of them. So we will go back to them. And as I said, we don't have that open access future mapped out, but we are really committed to open access and to work with our customers to find a way forward to realise this vision with them.
Thank you so much for joining today, and let's give a round of virtual applauses to our panelists. Excellent presentations, and thanks a lot for your questions. And thanks a lot to the Royal Society of Chemistry for supporting OASPA webinars. Thank you, and have a good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you are. Thank you.